The amber pupils in his eyes suddenly contracted, not out of remorse, but out of fear. The kind of fear that stems from the depths of ancient memory, etched into the very bones and blood of werewolves. The wind around the altar died down. The 500 werewolves, who had been cheering moments before, fell silent as if someone had clamped a hand over their throats. Only the sound of Avi's bare feet striking the stone slabs could be heard as she advanced step by step, each step feeling as though she were treading on everyone's hearts. She raised her eyes. They were no longer the deep blue brimming with tears from moments before, but a color never before recorded, like solidified moonlight, like molten silver, like the moon goddess herself stepping down from an ancient mural. "You say, my bloodline is base." Her voice was soft, yet it rang clearly in every wolf's ears. There was no anger, no snarl, only a desolation that seemed to have seen through 10,000 years of time. "Kyle, I poured your wine for 7 years. You made me kneel in the snow, starved me for 3 days, and whipped my back for breaking a crystal goblet. You think I'm just a mongrel orphan who narrowly escaped the Great Purge by sheer luck, don't you?" Kyle's jaw clenched. He instinctively pulled Lena a step behind him. A gesture Ivy knew all too well. It was the Wolf King's instinct to shield his mate. Except he wasn't shielding her. "Isn't that the truth?" Lena's shrill voice cut through the silence. "You're nothing but a lowly scum who sweeps floors and wipes tables. The prophecy stone was wrong. People like you aren't even worthy." She didn't finish her sentence. Avi merely glanced at her. Just that one glance, and Lena's lips seemed sealed by an invisible force, unable to utter a sound. Her face contorted with fear, she clutched her throat with both hands and collapsed to her knees. 500 werewolves gasped. That was the aura of a ruler, the commanding power possessed only by a pure-blooded alpha. But Avi wasn't an alpha. She was a handmaiden, a useless wolf who hadn't even completed her transformation, whose fur hadn't even fully grown in, unless she wasn't a wolf at all. Kyle's fingers trembled slightly. He sensed it. That aura was not a werewolf's pheromone, nor any pack mark he recognized. It was something far older than the first generation of wolf kings, older than this valley, and even older than the moon overhead. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, a low wolf's howl, rumbling in his throat. It was the great white wolf within him, restless, warning him, forcing him to his knees. Avi didn't answer. She lowered her head and looked at the back of her hand. Those silver patterns were slowly emerging, like ancient incantations, like lost script, like the symbol her mother had drawn in blood on her swaddling clothes before she died. Moonscar. She had never believed her mother's words. Things like, "You were never meant to belong here," or "Your father is no mortal. Your bloodline requires a seal to survive." She'd thought it was just the ramblings of a madwoman, her mother's final delusion before she was cast out of the clan. But now she could feel it. The thing slumbering in her blood was awakening, tearing away layer by layer of her 7-year disguise, devouring that lowly, timid maid who knew only how to kneel and scrub the floor. "Kyle, do you remember that winter 3 years ago?" She suddenly looked up and smiled at him. The smile was breathtakingly beautiful, yet as cold as the stagnant water beneath a glacier. "You were ambushed and poisoned by the abyss flower. They said you wouldn't survive the night. The clan shamans were all at a loss. Lena cried by your bedside all night, and the next morning you miraculously recovered. Everyone praised her true love for you, saying her tears had summoned the moon goddess's mercy." Kyle's expression changed. The color drained from his handsome face bit by bit, as if something had sucked it dry. "It wasn't her tears that saved you," Avi said softly, as if recounting a story that had nothing to do with her. "I used the power of the moon scar to draw the poison from your heart and transfer it into my own body. I endured it in bed for 3 days and 3 nights, my internal organs burning as if on fire, the pain so intense I bit through my own tongue and lips. And where were you? You were drinking red wine with Lena to celebrate your recovery. You're lying. I'm lying. Ivy slowly pulled back the sleeve of her left arm. There was a shocking scar there, black as ink, like a centipede crawling across her pale, slender wrist, the lingering mark of the abyss flower's poison. Then what is this? Did I draw it on myself? Kyle took a step back. It was the first time he had retreated tonight. The first time he had shown a look of embarrassment in front of the 500 clan members. Whispers began to rise from the distant wolf pack. It was the elders, the oldest silver-backed wolves in the clan. They had never seen the moon scar, but they had heard the ancient prophecy, the twins of destiny, the Sunday and moon shining together. The son of the Sunday rules all beasts. The daughter of the moon controls life and death. That was no legend. It was a dark chapter in werewolf history that had been deliberately erased. The Moon clan has long been extinct. A trembling, aged voice came from the crowd. In the year of the Great Purge, the last of the Moon clan were burned to death in the sacred fire. It's impossible. Impossible what? Ivy turned to face the silver-haired elder who had spoken. Impossible to have survived. Impossible to hide right under your noses. Impossible to have served as a shoe, polishing slave to your king for 7 years. She laughed, her laughter echoing over the empty altar. My mother did indeed die in that great purge. Before she was taken away, she used her last ounce of strength to seal my bloodline, making me smell like nothing more than an ordinary, lowly mongrel wolf. She hid me in the cellar of your palace because she knew the most dangerous place is the safest. You've been hunting down every member of the Moon clan across the continent for 20 years. Yet not a single one of you thought to check the servants in your own home. Lena was still convulsing on the ground, her lips bitten until they bled. Kyle stood between the two women, his shoulders tense, a fine sheen of cold sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at the scar on Avi's wrist and recalled that morning 3 years ago, the faintest trace of fragrance lingering on his lips and teeth when he'd woken, not Lena's rose scent, but something akin to the smell of the first snow under moonlight. In his daze, he thought it was a dream, an illusion of paradise. So it really was you, he managed to say, his voice sounding like sandpaper scraping against metal. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you? Ivy looked up, her eyes finally reddening, though no tears fell. Tell a king who's never once looked at me properly. Tell you that I'd take poison from my master, take a knife from my master, and what did I get in return? It was that day in the heavy snow, when you made me kneel barefoot outside, because Lena said her ring was missing, and I stood there with my hands behind my back, crying and saying I didn't steal it. It was that day when you flung aside the medicinal soup I offered you, cursing me and telling me not to think that brewing a few bowls of medicine would allow me to climb above my station. She advanced toward him step by step, each step shattering the stone slabs beneath her feet. The knees of 500 werewolves began to buckle. It wasn't fear, it was the natural dominance of the Moon clan's bloodline over all werewolves. Like a rabbit encountering a hawk, like a stream meeting the sea. They were utterly powerless to resist. One by one, they fell to their knees. First, the clan members on the outskirts, then the warriors, and finally the silver-haired elders. Only 3 people remained standing around the altar. Avi, Kyle, and Lena curled up on the ground like a worm. Now you know. Avi stopped 3 paces away from him, looking up at the man she had loved for 7 years. He was still wearing that black royal robe, a silver wolf, head brooch pinned to the collar, the very one she had knelt down to polish for him that morning. You publicly declared that your chosen partner was not me. You took the moonlight wreath meant for me with your own hands and placed it on that woman's head. She raised her right hand and opened her palm. Moonlight fell upon her hand, condensing into a drop of liquid shimmering with a rainbow. Colored halo. It was the emotions she had saved up for him over 7 years, a girl's most precious true heart. Now, she was going to reclaim that sincerity, every last drop of it. Kyle, I am not your true love. Before the sun sets today, I will leave this valley. But before I go, I have 2 things to tell you. She held up a finger. The silver flame dancing at its tip illuminated her smile. First, Lena cannot save you from the poison, nor can she save you from what lies ahead. Because the abyss flower's poison has after effects. It flares up once every 3 years, and tomorrow marks exactly 3 years. Lena's pupils dilated instantly. She shook her head frantically, trying to speak, but no sound came out. Second, Avi slowly crushed the drop of moonlight in her palm, scattering it into countless tiny specks of light that drifted away in the night breeze. One day in the future, you will kneel in a certain place, calling out my name over and over again. But I will stand where you can never reach me without even turning my head. She lowered her hand and pulled a thin silver chain from around her neck. The only thing of value she possessed, a keepsake left to her by her mother, and the last shred of dignity for the Moon Clan. The silver chain landed at his feet, emitting a sharp, piercing clang. Let someone else pour your wine from now on. She turned, her back to the 500 werewolves, kneeling on the ground, her back to the Alpha King, who had finally begun to tremble all over, and walked toward the dense forest on the other side of the altar, leading out of the valley. The moon cast a long shadow behind her. It was not the shadow of a wolf, nor that of a human, but a form never before seen in the world, like a pair of wings, slowly unfolding, woven from starlight. The darkness of the dense forest swallowed her whole. On the altar, only a deathly silence remained, along with that abandoned silver chain, glowing with a faint, icy light in the moonlight. Kyle stood rooted to the spot, motionless. His white wolf raged within him, nearly tearing through his chest to chase after that receding figure. It was a mark etched deep within his soul, a call that every werewolf encounters only once in a lifetime, the call of a soulmate. He had just let her go, in front of everyone. No, he hadn't let her go. He had driven her away, in the cruelest way possible. In front of 500 werewolves, he had personally shattered her dignity with his own hands, only to discover that she was the one who could keep him alive. King, an elder spoke tremblingly. Should we send someone to pursue? No need. Kyle cut him off, his voice returning to its usual calm. She's just a handmaiden, whether it be the Moon Clan or the witches, who on this continent can stand against us, the werewolf clan. He bent down and picked up the slender silver chain lying on the ground. It still retained the lingering warmth of her body, along with that faint first smell, like fragrance that inexplicably tightened his chest. He pulled the chain tight and clenched it in his palm, yet his fingers trembled uncontrollably. Deep within the dense forest in the distance, a wolf's howl pierced the long night. It was not Kyle's howl, nor was it the voice of any wolf he knew. It was a strange, piercing cry, tinged with bloodlust, the call of another wolf king. Kyle's spine stiffened suddenly. That direction was exactly where Avi had gone. Deep in the dense forest, Ivy was running. Her bare feet crushed dry twigs, and thorns tore at her ankles. But she felt no pain. The power that had just awakened within her raged through her veins, like a caged beast that had been locked up for too long, unable to find a way out. She was running desperately deeper into the forest, not out of fear, but because she was afraid that if she slowed down even for a moment, she would turn around and run back to that man. She knew herself all too well. You can't just let go of someone you've loved for 7 years and 3 minutes. The scar on her wrist hadn't faded completely even after 3 years. How much less so something etched into her very bones. The canopy of trees above blocked the moonlight, and the forest was as dark as a deep well. She missed a step and fell headfirst into a patch of wet moss. Her knee struck a rock, and the pain made her gasp. It was during that brief pause that a sound came from behind her. Not the footsteps of a human, but of a wolf, heavy blood-scented panting, and that overwhelming aura of slaughter, like a net tightening in from all sides. Avie rolled over abruptly, her back pressed against the trunk of an old oak tree. Her fingers dug into the soil, and the silver glow on her fingertips flared instinctively. In the darkness, she saw a pair of yellow eyes, then a second pair, a third, a fourth. More than a dozen pairs of eyes emerged from behind the bushes, forming a seamless circle. She recognized that scent. It was the desert wolves of the North, outcasts without a pack, who made their living by hunting lone travelers. But the desert wolves would never dare set foot on Kale's territory. The pheromone boundary of the Wolf King was enough to strike fear into any foreign pack, unless the boundary no longer existed. Unless this pack had been waiting here the entire time she entered, as if waiting for a predestined prey. The largest male wolf stepped out of the shadows. He was twice the height of an ordinary wolf, with an old scar running from his neck to his tail. A scar so deep that the sparse fur could not fully conceal the ugly pink flesh beneath. It snorted, thick saliva, dripping from between its fangs onto the moss at Avie's feet, making a sizzling, corrosive sound. "Little girl of the Moon Clan," the wolf spoke, its voice like stone grinding against sandpaper. "Did you really think we wouldn't smell it?" Avie's back tensed. She watched the wolf advance step by step, watched the pack behind it close in on her. She couldn't yet control the power she'd just awakened. The silver flame at her fingertips flickered on and off, like a candle nearly extinguished by the wind. "Have you been waiting for me? All this time. We've been waiting for you for 7 years. The scarred wolf split its lips into what was probably a grin. "Ever since the day your mother was burned to death, we knew there was one cub left we hadn't caught. They kept the news so tightly under wraps, claiming the Moon Clan was extinct. But we didn't believe it. So we waited for you to reveal yourself." It lowered its head, its yellow eyes hovering close to Ivy's face. The stench it exhaled, making her nearly vomit. "That seal on you. Your mother traded her life for it. Now you've shattered it. Guess how many people on this continent are rushing this way right now?" Ivy's pupils contracted sharply. She understood. She understood everything. Why her mother had hidden her away, why she'd sealed her bloodline with her life, not to hide from the werewolves, but to hide from those who truly knew the Moon Clan's secret. And her awakening tonight at the altar was like a massive torch lit in the darkness, exposing her location to every pair of eyes across the entire continent. She had just thought that Kyle's betrayal was the worst thing that had ever happened to her, but now she realized that might not even be the beginning. Scarface licked his lips. Saliva dripped onto the moss, corroding a smoking hole. The boss gave orders. Alive is best, but dead will do. As for me personally, he didn't finish that sentence, because a silver arrow, appearing out of nowhere, sliced through the air and drove itself precisely into his right eye socket. The shaft sank in completely, leaving only half the silver feathers of the arrowhead exposed, glinting coldly in the fragments of moonlight. Scar Wolf let out a blood-curdling howl as its massive body crashed to the ground. Blood and brain matter spurted from its eye socket, splattering Avie's legs. The wolf pack instantly fell into chaos, scrambling backward, but the arrows didn't stop. A second, a third, a fourth, each shot from an angle, so precise it seemed impossible for a human to achieve, each striking a vital spot. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the dozen or so desert wolves had fallen. The remaining few tucked their tails between their legs and scurried into the thicket, not daring to look back. Avi stood frozen in place as blood spread from beneath the scarred wolf's corpse to her bare feet. She looked up toward the direction the arrows had come from, but saw only a dense, dark forest. "Stay right here. Don't move." The voice came from behind her, so close it sent a shiver down her spine. She hadn't sensed anyone approaching, which meant the other person's stealth far surpassed her own. Avi turned and saw a man stepping out of the shadows of the trees, a jet-black hunting bow in his hand. He wore a dark gray cloak, its hood concealing most of his face, revealing only a sharply defined jawline. But from the occasional glimmer of light filtering through the cloak, she could see silver patterns winding around his right arm, the mark of the Moon Clan. "Are you of the Moon Clan too?" "No more." He slung the bow behind his back, kicked a wolf's carcass aside with a downward kick, his tone as cold as if he were discussing the weather. "Now there's only you and me." With that, he pulled back his hood. A sliver of moonlight finally filtered through the leaves, illuminating his face. He looked a few years older than Avi, with dark hair and gray, blue eyes like a frozen winter lake. An old scar ran down his left cheek from his brow to the base of his ear. The wound had once been deep, but had healed poorly, leaving an ugly scar. Yet his entire demeanor was not rough. Rather, he possessed an indescribable calm, like a sword wrapped in old cloth. "Noah," he said, without a word to spare. "Let's go." "Where to?" "Somewhere safe." He glanced back at her. The scar glinted in the moonlight. "If you really want to know, I'll tell you as we go. But I suggest you start running. Those wolves we missed earlier are already heading back with every hound in the north." Before his words had even faded, the faint howls of wolves began to rise in the distance. Not just one, but dozens. Converging from all directions, growing ever closer, like a massive hunt closing in. Avi took a deep breath. The wound on the sole of her foot finally began to throb. She hobbled along, keeping pace with Noah. The two of them vanished into the dense forest. Back at the altar, time had frozen at the moment she had just left. Kyle clenched the silver chain, the knuckles of his fingers cracking from the strain. The massive white wolf raged within him, violently ramming against the cage of his soul. Each impact was accompanied by a searing headache and a churning nausea in his stomach. He knew what this was, the withdrawal symptoms every werewolf experiences after losing their destined mate. No, not losing. He had rejected her with his own hands. "Your Majesty, you need to rest," the silver-haired elder said tentatively. "There must have been a misunderstanding tonight. That handmaiden, that Moon Clan woman, she must have used some underhanded trick to make the prophecy stone point to her. She saved me." Kyle's voice was faint. The elder froze. "For 3 years, I always thought it was Lena's tears." He held the silver chain up to the moonlight. The chain refracted tiny specks of light in the glow. "When I woke up, she was kneeling by my bed, her eyes swollen from crying, her voice hoarse, saying she'd begged the moon goddess all night. How could I ever have thought to doubt her?" He paused for a moment, then shifted his gaze to the woman still slumped on the ground. Lena was clutching her throat, her lips trembling. The scent of rose perfume on her was turning sour, the result of an overproduction of fear pheromones. "Let her speak," Kyle commanded. The restraints binding Lena dissolved instantly. She took a deep breath and, the moment her voice returned, screamed, "She's lying. That scar is fake. She drew it herself. She's trying to deceive you." "How does she know I was poisoned?" Kyle cut her off, his voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch. "Only you, me, and the 3 elders know about this. That maid doesn't even know which floor of the palace she lives on." Lena's face went completely pale. whiter than a stone slab in the moonlight. She was eavesdropping. Kneel. Those two words weren't shouted forcefully, yet they carried the weight of an iron anvil crashing to the ground. Lena's legs gave way, and she fell face down on the floor. At that moment, Kyle already knew the answer, not because he had seen any evidence, but because of Lena's eyes. Those eyes, which he had once thought were innocent and naive, were now filled with the embarrassment and terror of a scheme being exposed. He turned to look at the 500 werewolves still kneeling below the dais. Their gazes held shock, fear, and confusion. But more than anything, they held a hidden sense of schadenfreude. This was the price of the throne. Everyone was waiting for you to stumble. Everyone was secretly calculating what they could claim from your corpse once you fell. He couldn't fall now. He couldn't lose his composure in front of 500 people because of a woman, even the one who had truly saved his life. He was the Alpha King. His authority was built upon absolute coldness. Dismissed, he waved his hand. Not a word of tonight's events is to be spoken of. Anyone who disobeys will be expelled from the pack. The pack dispersed as if granted a pardon. Heads bowed, moving swiftly away. Even the women who usually loved to gossip dared not linger. No one wanted to court misfortune at a time like this. In the blink of an eye, only Kyle, Lena, and the 3 silver-haired elders remained around the altar. King, that Moon Clan girl. The eldest elder spoke hesitantly. Should we send someone to find her? After all, she is your destined mate, according to ancient tradition. No need. Kyle tucked the silver chain into his robe, pressing it close to his heart. His voice had regained its icy tone, but flames burned within his amber eyes. I will not force a woman who has walked away to return. Whether she is of the Moon Clan or nothing at all, she chose this path herself, and she must bear the consequences. He looked down at Lena, who was still trembling on the ground, reached out, and pulled her to her feet. As his fingers closed around her, the force was so great it made her bones creep. You, come back to the palace with me. Lena froze, tears welling in her eyes. Kyle, I know you'll believe me. Believe you, he smiled, a smile that made Lena's blood run cold instantly. Lena, you'd better explain everything clearly from here on out. For every lie you tell, I'll snap one of your fingers. You have 10 fingers, 10 chances. He dragged her toward the palace, his pace so fast she nearly stumbled. Behind them the elders exchanged glances, none daring to speak. Silence returned to the valley, under the moonlight. But within a crack in the altar stone invisible to everyone, something was glimmering. It was a strand of light that had slipped out when Avi had crushed that drop of moonlight moments ago, now seeping silently along the ancient geometric patterns into the stone foundation of the altar. The pattern lit up. It was a magical array, an ancient pact that had slumbered for a century, using the entire altar as its canvas and the breath of 500 werewolves as its sustenance. And now it had been inadvertently activated by an awakened Moon Clan member, deep within the dense forest. Noah stopped in his tracks. He looked up toward the altar, his gray, blue eyes reflecting the golden green, eerie glow rising slowly from the depths of the earth. It has begun, he said. Avi followed his gaze and saw the light like a pillar reaching to the heavens, piercing the night and shooting straight into the sky. A sudden, sharp pain stabbed her heart. Her knees buckled and she collapsed to the ground. The old scar from the abyss flower poison on her wrist was spreading up her arm at a visible speed, like a black snake. The poison will take effect tomorrow. Noah watched the changes on her arm, his tone utterly unruffled. The 3-year deadline, not a single day will be off. The relapse of the abyss flower poison will be more severe than when he was first poisoned. Without the bloodline of the moon, clan to absorb the toxin for him, he will die. He paused, as if choosing his words. You will likely sense it. The farther away you are, the more painful the sensation. In the end, if he really doesn't make it, you won't even be able to breathe. Avi looked up at the pillar of light shooting into the sky, then at the spreading scars on her own arm, and suddenly felt like laughing. She had risked her life to save him for 7 years. He had repaid her with indifference. Now that she had finally managed to escape, she found that even the choice to not save him wasn't so easy to make. How much time is left? Until midnight tomorrow. Noah turned away and continued walking. I suggest you run faster. The farther you are from him, the weaker the connection. And we still have to cross at least 2 more mountains to get where we're going. Avi clenched her teeth and pushed herself up with her hands. Blood seeped continuously from the wound on the sole of her foot, leaving a trail of dark red stains on the fallen leaves. She didn't look back, but her fingers were trembling, partly from the pain caused by the spreading venom of the abyss flower, and partly because she knew all too well. Once she crossed those 2 mountains, she would no longer be able to sense him, and he would succumb to the poison. He would suffer. He would suffocate. He would die. Let's go, she whispered, as if giving herself an order, yet also as if making a final farewell to the name burning in her heart. The 2 figures were soon completely swallowed by the darkness of the dense forest. Behind them, the golden-green pillar of light continued to rise toward the sky, like a signal that some ancient taboo had been broken, causing all the things hidden in the shadows across the continent, things that should never have awakened, to open their eyes one after another. As they crossed the ridge of the first mountain, the horizon was already beginning to lighten. Noah led the way, striding as if measuring the ground, the bowstring of his hunting bow never slackening. Avi followed behind. The blood on her feet had already congealed, but as the abyss flower's poison spread, with every step she took, she could feel that black toxin crawling from her wrist toward her heart, like a cold centipede wriggling beneath her skin. She didn't cry out in pain. It wasn't that it didn't hurt. It was that she didn't want the cold-hearted man ahead of her to think she was a burden. She had been a useless burden to too many people for far too long in her life. Now that she finally knew what kind of blood flowed through her veins, she refused to live on her knees anymore, but her body wouldn't cooperate. As they crested the ridge, her vision suddenly went black, and she stumbled forward. Without turning his head, Noah reached back with his left hand, grabbing her collar just in time to pull her up. How far has the poison spread? Avi steadied herself and took a few deep breaths. My elbow. Noah frowned, released her, and pulled a palm-sized leather pouch from the inner pocket of his cloak, tossing it into her arms. She opened the pouch to find a dark green ointment inside that smelled like rotten herbs mixed with some kind of metal. Rub it on the scar. It'll buy you 12 hours. How did you get this? Avi rubbed the ointment onto her wrist. A searing pain instantly shot through her bones. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, but beads of sweat were already trickling down her forehead. Your mother left it for me, Noah said, without a flicker of emotion in his voice, as if he were simply noting that the weather was nice today. She told me that if you ever broke the seal, you should use this to contain the toxin. Once we get you back to the origin, there's a more permanent solution. This was the 2nd time Noah had mentioned her mother. Each time he spoke of it in passing, yet every sentence held enough information to fill an entire story. You knew my mom? Don't ask what you shouldn't until the time comes. With that, he resumed walking. Ivy stood where she was, watching the old scar on his cheek cast a grayish, white line across his face, and suddenly recalled the arrow he'd just fired with such precision to pierce the scarred wolf. That shot wasn't something an ordinary person could pull off. The arrow had sliced through the shadows of the trees, cut through the wind, and slipped through the gaps between a dozen wolves. embedding itself precisely in the center of the eye socket. That required more than just skill. It demanded an understanding of wolf behavior, an anticipation of wind speed, and a precise grasp of skeletal structure. This man had been trained to kill wolves, or rather, he had been trained to kill wolves. Avi stopped asking questions, sealed the remaining ointment, tucked it into her bosom, and quickened her pace to catch up. The ointment was working. The spread of the toxin had clearly slowed, but the side effect was that her thoughts were growing hazy. Her consciousness felt as if it were submerged in lukewarm water, and at the edges of her vision, blurry phantoms kept flickering. The mountain path grew narrower and narrower. Day had fully broken, but the sun was obscured by thick clouds, and a damp, chilly mist filled the valley. Noah led her to the edge of a cliff, parted the vines hanging from the rock face, revealing a man-sized opening. Go in. Inside was a natural tunnel that widened as they went deeper, eventually opening up into a spacious chamber. Ivy rubbed her eyes. It was a hidden space within the mountain, like a small, forgotten sanctuary. The stone walls were covered with dense patterns of symbols, identical to the markings that had appeared on the wound on Ivy's back. Deep inside stood a stone platform, upon which rested a rusty bronze casket. Noah walked over, leaned his bow against the edge of the platform, placed his fingers on the casket, and paused for a moment before speaking. Your mother lived here for a while. A year before the Great Purge, she hid in these mountains, carving Moon Clan incantations into the stone walls every day. She feared she wouldn't live to teach you these things, so she carved them all into the stone. She said that if I were ever gone, my daughter would find this place. He turned to face her, his gray-blue eyes looking like two ancient, frozen wells in the dim light. I didn't believe it at first. Who would be foolish enough to risk discovery by sealing their own bloodline inside the palace of their enemies? Who would believe their only daughter could survive 7 years among werewolves? Who would entrust an infant to a 16-year-old hunter? You mean... Ivy's breath caught. She entrusted you to me, Noah said. When the fire broke out that day, I was the one who carried you out of the flames. I hadn't even had a chance to feed you your first sip of goat's milk before she pushed me out through the secret passage. The last thing I saw was the smell of her singed hair. The air hung heavy for several seconds. Avy opened her mouth, but only a faint, barely audible sob escaped her throat. All her life, she had believed herself to be an orphan, an abandoned mongrel, a parasite who had survived by sheer luck among the werewolves. Now someone was telling her that her mother had sealed her bloodline with her own life, hiding her in the most dangerous place of all, and entrusting a young hunter to care for her. But she had never known this person existed. And then, she asked, her voice trembling. Then I lay in wait on the outskirts of the palace for several months. I discovered the seal was more effective than I'd anticipated. You smelled like nothing more than a lowly mongrel wolf. I couldn't take you away, much less raise you, so I went to the north. I planted spies in every pack of exiled wolves and infiltrated every hunting organization that had a warrant out for your arrest. Over 7 years, I eliminated 17 spies who came close to finding you. Once they tracked down the palace cellar before they entered the valley, I slit the throats of the entire squad. He spoke without a trace of boastfulness, as if reporting dry statistics. But Avy heard what lay between the lines. This man hadn't lived a single day for himself in 7 years. Why did you do all this? Her voice rose to a shrill pitch with emotion. If my mother was just someone you knew, did you really have to risk your life guarding her daughter for 7 years? Noah didn't answer. His gaze fell upon the ancient symbols etched into the stone wall. He remained silent for a long while before bending down to press open the bronze casket. The moment the lid swung open, the entire stone chamber was flooded with a pure silver light, so bright that Ivy instinctively raised her hand to shield her eyes. Through the gaps in her fingers, she saw a blade lying inside the box. No, it wasn't a blade. It was some sort of short dagger solidified from moonlight, transparent as ice, with a silver liquid flowing through its center, like a Milky Way sealed within amber. A single character was engraved on the hilt, an ancient script she couldn't read, but she recognized the shape of that character at a glance. It was the last symbol her mother had ever drawn on her swaddling clothes. Where the moon's scar lies, all things fall silent. This is the Moon Clan's token, the blade of the moon's tears. Noah took the short blade from the box, spun it halfway in his hand, and passed it to Avi. Take it on the path we're about to take. There will be things more troublesome than desert wolves. Like what? Like humans. When that word slipped from Noah's lips, it carried a chill that had been suppressed for far too long. You don't really think werewolves are the only ones after the Moon Clan's lives, do you? The Moon Clan was once the only force on this continent capable of suppressing the werewolves. The human royal court, the elven council of elders, even the Dragon Clan's night watch. Everyone coveted the Moon Clan's power. During the Great Purge, it wasn't just werewolves who killed your people. Humans lit the first fire, the elves cast the sealing spell, and the Dragon Clan's night watch patrolled the skies to ensure no Moon Clan member could fly out of the flames alive. Your mother was killed by all of them. His voice was not loud, but every word drove into Avi's eardrums like a nail. The temperature in the stone chamber seemed to drop instantly. Avi gripped the hilt of the moon-weeping blade, feeling a chill power seep through her fingers into her heart, merging with the suppressed bloodline within her. They won't let a second Moon Clan member return alive, Noah said. So from this moment on, you must not repeat tonight's mistakes. You must not use the power of your bloodline carelessly. You must not display the moon mark in public, and you must not sheathe this blade in front of anyone. He took a step forward, close enough to smell the scent of blood on each other. Most importantly, you must not show the Wolf King even a shred of mercy. No matter what you sense, no matter how deeply he's been poisoned, no matter which mountain peak he kneels on calling your name, forget him. Avi's knuckles turned white as she gripped the hilt. She wanted to argue, but found she had no grounds to do so, because every word Noah spoke was true. Kyle was an old wound in her heart, a wound that hadn't yet scabbed over, only to be torn open again by tonight's upheaval and doused in salt water. But she knew all too well that if she returned, she would become a tool chained to the throne, not a partner held in his arms. I will forget him, she said, her voice soft but firm. But not now. I can't do it now. Then, there is at least one thing you can do. Noah pulled a yellowed parchment map from his coat and spread it out on the stone slab. The map depicted the continent's complete outline, but in the deepest reaches of the north, there was a patch blacked out with ink, with a blank space for notes beside it. Before you reach this place, you must not stop to weep even once. Avi lowered her head and stared at the blackened area on the map. There were no markings there, but something inside her, an instinct older than memory, told her that this was where everything ended and where it all began. She took a deep breath and sheathed the moon-weeping blade in the belt at her waist. The blade pressed against her skin, cold but not stinging. Instead, it felt like a sturdy anchor, pinning all her drifting emotions back into her body. Let's go, she said. Noah folded up the map and stopped abruptly as he reached the tunnel entrance. Someone's coming. Avi sensed it too. The ground was trembling, not from an earthquake, but from a pack of wolves running. And they were coming from directly above, from the ridgeline at the top of the cliff. A massive column, accompanied by the clang of metal and low-labored panting, was advancing toward their position. The scale of the wolf pack was entirely different from before. These weren't stragglers from the exiles. This was a disciplined werewolf army. Noah's expression changed for the first time. Not out of fear, but out of disbelief. How could he have sent troops so quickly? I thought he'd at least wait until the poison took effect tomorrow. A chill ran through Avi's veins. for she too had sensed it. The scent pressing down from the distance was the distinctive cedar pheromone of the alpha king. Kyle, but he was not alone. Racing ahead of him was another scent she had never encountered before. A stench of death, like charred bones, molten iron, and countless festering wounds, all converging into one. It's not his men. Avi clenched her knife. They're following the trail of my poison. Those desert wolves that weren't shot down have found a new master. Above the tunnel, sand and soil began to fall in a rustling shower. The Moon Clan runes carved into the stone walls decades ago were flaking off one by one as the ground trembled. Noah wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pushed her deeper into the tunnel. Run. Don't stop. No matter what you hear. Avi didn't stop. She pushed herself forward with all her might. The wound on the sole of her foot split open again, blood seeping out once more, leaving a series of intermittent marks in the dark tunnel. From the direction of the entrance behind them came the deafening crash of shattering rock, and sunlight poured in explosively through the cracked fissures. She heard the sound of Noah drawing his bow. 3 arrows fired in unison, the string twanging 3 times. Then came a completely unfamiliar sound, a laugh like metal, scraping against glass, unlike anything a living creature could produce. You little bastard of the Moon Clan, finally decided to come out. The tunnel collapsed, daylight poured in, and dust obscured all vision. In the very last second before she turned away, Avi saw Noah standing at the tunnel entrance, his hunting bow drawn to the limit, his cloak fluttering in the wind like a flag about to shatter. And on the cliff ahead of him stood a dense mass of shadows. Those weren't desert wolves. They were some kind of modified creature. The body of a wolf, the posture of a human, with a pitch-black metal skeleton protruding from their backs. Their eye sockets held no eyeballs, only 2 dark red orbs of light. The Northern Death Guards. The filthiest experimental subjects in werewolf history. One of the legacies of the Great Purge. The leader of the pack tilted his head, his gaze piercing through Noah's shoulder to fix directly on the hand gripping Avi's blade. A mouth split open across his scarred face. Your mother burned quite beautifully back then. Do you want to know how she screamed in her final minutes? The moon-weeping blade trembled violently in Avi's hand. The blade was trembling. It wasn't Ivy who was shaking. It was the blade itself. The moon-weeping blade hummed deeply against her skin, like a caged beast that had been chained for too long and had finally caught the scent of its enemy. That icy intent to kill flowed through the hilt into her veins, colliding with the surging power of the moon scar within her body, and sparking a layer of silver light that spread from her wrist all the way to her shoulder. The runes on the stone wall were still flaking off, and every piece of debris that fell to the ground was accompanied by the sound of the tunnel entrance collapsing. Noah had already fired 3 arrows, each one piercing precisely into the eye sockets of the undead guards. For an ordinary werewolf, a single arrow like that would be fatal, but those dark red specks of light merely flickered as the shafts sank in, then reignited immediately, like embers in the wind, unquenchable. The lopsided monster leading the pack pulled the arrow shaft from its eye socket, drawing out a viscous black liquid. It looked down at its own blood caked on the arrowhead, then opened its mouth and snapped the shaft in 2 with its jagged row of fangs. The hunter's aim is still as sharp as ever. Its voice sounded like shards of glass scraping against a metal plate. But you cannot kill something that has already died once. It raised a forelimb. It could no longer be called a hand. Bones protruded from beneath the skin, sheathed in a dull metallic sheen, with 5 finger bones fused into a naturally formed bone blade. It tapped the bone blade against its chest, producing a clanging metallic sound. My heart's been moved. Half my brain's been cut out. My pain receptors have been burned away. Do you really think you can kill us with arrows? Noah said nothing. His hand was already on the fourth arrow, but the bowstring wasn't fully drawn. He was calculating. From the line of his shoulders and back, Ivy could tell that this hunter was frantically dissecting the battle before him in his mind. The number of enemies, the advantages of the terrain, the retreat routes, and the impact of her foot injury on her speed. He wasn't calculating the odds of winning, because the odds of winning were 0. Noah. Ivy's voice echoed from deep within the tunnel. Step aside. He didn't turn around. Your foot wound has reopened. You can't run fast. Head deeper into the tunnel from here. After about 300 paces, there's a fork. Turn left and run another 200 paces, and you'll reach the waterfall at the back of the mountain. Jump off the waterfall and drift downstream with the current. That way, you can shake off the enemies chasing you on the ground. Are you making your last will and testament? I'm buying you time. The moment the words left his mouth, his bowstring was fully drawn. The fourth arrow wasn't aimed at any of the death guards, but at the rock wall above the cave entrance. The arrowhead embedded itself in a crack that had already been fractured by the tremors, and the barbs on the shaft caught on the loose rock. The entire section of the wall began to collapse from above. Huge boulders crashed down onto the cave entrance, sending a cloud of dust into the air and temporarily blocking the death guard's view. But this could only buy a few seconds. 10 or so at most. Sure enough, the bone blade pierced through from the other side of the rubble, slicing through the rock as if it were tofu. The voice of the tilted head squeezed through the crevice, tinged with a twisted delight. Hunter, do you know why the death guards of the north are called death guards? Because not only do we never die, but we also remember everything from when we were alive. I remember the night I was sent to kill your Moon clan. I remember the sight of that woman's hair burning. I remember the words she spoke. The rubble exploded with a thunderous crash. The skull head stood in the center of the collapsed entrance, its metal skeleton glowing coldly in the morning light. It tilted its half-rotted head, its dark red eye sockets, piercing straight through Noah's shoulder to lock onto Ivy's face. She said, "My daughter will kill you all." Those words were like a switch. Something inside AV exploded. It wasn't anger. Anger was too shallow to contain the emotion now pounding in her chest. It was 7 years of suppressed humiliation, a lifetime of sealed power, an entire race slaughtered in the holy fire, all awakening in a single instant. She no longer felt the pain in her feet, nor the spread of the abyss flower's poison. She could not even hear her own heartbeat. She could hear only a single sound, like moonlight piercing through millennia of darkness to illuminate the ocean floor. The sound of the moon-weeping blade awakening. The blade glowed. It wasn't a reflection. The blade itself was emitting light. The Milky Way sealed within the amber began to flow. From the hilt to the tip, then back up through her fingers. The entire stone chamber was illuminated as if it were broad daylight. The death guards took a collective step back. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. That deep-seated terror etched into their mutated genes, which they had believed they had completely eradicated, was fully reawakened the moment the blade of the Moon clan lit up. Impossible, the voice from the tilted head cracked for the first time. The blade of the Moon's tears has been destroyed. That year of the Great Purge it didn't finish. Because AV moved. She didn't know how to wield a blade. No one had ever taught her. Her grip was wrong. Her footwork lacked any technique whatsoever, and Noah didn't even have time to touch the hem of her robe before she struck. But as she swung that blow, the blade itself guided her. The blade knew how to fall, knew which angle to strike at, knew the arc the silver light blade would trace through the air once it flew from the hilt. The blade of light grazed past Noah's ear, shearing off a few strands of his hair, then struck the bone blade on the tilted head with precision. That bone blade, capable of slicing through rock, crumbled like paper the moment it touched the moonlight. Skewed head's entire right foreleme snapped off at the shoulder, The break was as clean as if cut by a laser, and black blood spurted from the severed end, splattering against the stone wall and emitting a hissing, corrosive sound. Skew. Head looked down at its severed arm, then looked up at the knife still glowing in Avi's hand. For the first time, an expression appeared on its mangled face. Not anger, not fear, but a deeply twisted excitement. "I've found it," it said, its voice trembling with a kind of reverence. "I've finally found it." It raised its remaining arm and made a gesture in the air. All the death guards simultaneously surged in from every direction of the tunnel entrance. They moved with a speed uncharacteristic of creatures of their size, like a flock of marionettes controlled by a single brain. Noah fired 3 arrows in rapid succession, each striking a vital spot, but they paid him no heed. Their eyes were fixed solely on Avi. To be precise, only the knife in Ivy's hand. "Retreat!" Noah grabbed Ivy's wrist and dragged her deeper into the tunnel. His strength was astonishing. Ivy stumbled as he pulled her along, the moon's lament blade in her hand scraping against the stone wall, leaving a charred gash. The glint of the blade illuminated the dense network of branching passages in the tunnel. Without even looking, Noah chose the leftmost one. He had clearly memorized the map of this tunnel beforehand. Behind them, the footsteps of the death guards grew closer. They weren't running, they were crawling. Their bodies moved rapidly through the narrow tunnel in twisted contortions, their metal skeletons scraping against the stone walls and emitting a piercing screech, like the sound of fingernails on a blackboard amplified 100-fold. "Is the blade their target?" Avi shouted as she ran. "It's you," Noah said without turning back. "The blade is merely a token. The Moonweep blade can only be activated by those of the Moon Clan's bloodline. That strike you just made is like broadcasting your location across the entire continent. Now it's not just the Death Guards. Anything capable of sensing the energy fluctuations of the Moon Clan will be rushing this way." He veered sharply into a side passage, shoving Avi into a recess in the rock wall and positioning himself in front of her. He drew his bow, the arrowhead aimed toward the tunnel's entrance. His breathing held to a whisper. The footsteps slowed. The death guards halted at the fork. They tilted their heads as if sniffing the air or receiving some command inaudible to humans. Then, they did not choose the path where Noah and Avi were hiding. They chose the other one, turning as a group, their footsteps gradually fading into the distance. Noah did not lower his bow. His brow furrowed even deeper. "They didn't lose our trail," he whispered. "Someone called them back." "Who?" Noah didn't answer, but his jaw was set as taut as a drawn bowstring. Ivy followed his gaze. In the direction the death guards had retreated, a faint golden streak of morning light filtered through a crack in the rock wall at the end of the tunnel, where it had been shattered by the blast. Extremely fine dust floated in the morning light. No, that wasn't dust. It was the residue of some kind of magic, golden, fine, like crushed gold leaf scattered through the air. That aura wasn't that of a werewolf, nor of the Moon Clan. It was a completely unfamiliar energy fluctuation, ancient, heavy, carrying a certain religious sense that instinctively unsettled one. Noah's expression changed completely. He slung his bow behind his back and drew a short knife from his waist. Not to fight, but to grip it by the hilt and tap the stone wall with the back of the blade. He tapped 3 times too short. One long, then pressed his palm against the wall and murmured a word Avi couldn't understand. A muffled rumble echoed from within the stone wall. A hidden stone door slowly swung open, revealing a narrow passageway, so constricted she could only squeeze through sideways. "Go in." He pushed her inside, squeezing through last himself, then closed the stone door with a backhand. Darkness engulfed everything once more, leaving only the faint silver glow of the moon-weeping blade in Avi's hand. "What was that golden thing just now?" Avi's voice echoed through the narrow passage. Noah remained silent for a long time. "Have you ever heard of the Knights of Dawn?" Avi shook her head, All she'd ever heard in her life were the petty squabbles within the werewolf clan. Which alpha had stolen which elder's daughter, which hunting party had discovered rare moonlight grass in which mountain range. Her knowledge of the outside world didn't even extend to having seen a complete map of the continent. One of the oldest military forces in the human world, Noah's voice sounded particularly deep in the darkness. During the Great Purge, they were the ones who lit the first fire among the werewolves. Their creed consists of a single phrase: all non-human power must be burned to ashes. Werewolves, the Moon Clan, elves, dragons, any being that isn't pure human is their target. Back then, they formed a temporary alliance with the werewolves to exterminate the Moon Clan, not because they liked werewolves, but because the Moon Clan's power came too close to the realm of the divine. They feared losing control of the world. He paused. The Death Guards are their creation. Biological weapons engineered by combining werewolf captives with alchemy. I had assumed they were all destroyed after the Great Purge, but it seems they not only failed to destroy them, they've been keeping them alive all this time. Avi's fingers unconsciously tightened around the hilt of her knife. In the darkness, she couldn't see Noah's expression, but she could sense something in his voice that had been suppressed for years. Not hatred. Hatred requires a clear target. But what dominated his voice was helplessness, the pallor of a hunter facing prey far more powerful than himself. Can the place you mentioned, the place of origin, hold them back? It's the only place that can stop them, Noah said. Your mother chose to seal you within the werewolf king's palace back then, not just because of the blind spot beneath the lamp. It was also because an ancient pact flows through the werewolf king's bloodline, one capable of blocking the Dawn Knight's tracking senses within a certain radius. Kyle's palace is built right at the center of that pact. Kyle. The sudden mention of that name felt like a needle piercing Ivy's chest. The abyss flower poison on her wrist convulsed violently. She let out a muffled groan and braced herself against the stone wall to keep from falling. Noah's hand found her shoulder with precision in the darkness. Has it begun? She bit her lip, cold sweat beading on her forehead. The poison has taken hold. Through the black scar on her wrist, she could vaguely sense what was happening in the distance. Not as a visual image, but as a sensation. It was another person's pain piercing through space and crashing into her nerves. His internal organs were being eroded inch by the abyss flower's poison. Breathing was becoming difficult, and every heartbeat was accompanied by a searing, agonizing pain in his veins. He was enduring it. He'd bitten a tooth to dust, refusing to show any weakness in front of Lena. But the person on his mind wasn't Lena. It was Ivy. It was the figure who'd spent the past 7 years kneeling at his feet, mopping the floor, serving drinks, and enduring punishment. It was the look she'd given him as she turned to leave today. Not hatred, but utter resignation. And her resignation hurt him more than her hatred ever could. Don't sense it, Noah's voice snapped, his hand pressing against the back of her neck, not with great force, but with an air of command. The more you sense it, the faster the toxin spreads. You can't save him. You'll only drag yourself down with him. I know. Ivy's voice trembled, but she forced herself to stand straight. She switched the knife to her left hand, clenched her right fist, and dug her nails into her palm, using a different kind of pain to drown out the heart. Wrenching agony coming from afar. Let's go. How far is it past the second mountain? Noah watched her in the darkness for a long moment before finally letting go. Not far, but the second mountain isn't really a mountain. It's called Ashen Valley, the place where the Moon Clan was burned to death during the Great Purge. The dark passage began to slope upward. The stone steps beneath their feet had been worn smooth by time, and the moss on the stone walls gave off a damp, musty odor. Avi followed Noah step by step as they climbed upward, the faint glow of the moon-weeping blade casting their distorted shadows into the narrow space. In the world behind her, the Wolf King on that altar was experiencing the full onset of the first wave of the Abyss Flower's poison, and the path before her led to a place called the Valley of Ashes, where every inch of soil was the ashes of her people. As the secret passage came to an end, the air changed. It wasn't that it grew colder or warmer, but rather that it suddenly felt lighter, like rising from the depths of the water to the surface, or ascending from the deep sea to the shallows. Every breath carried an indescribable sense of emptiness. It wasn't that there was less oxygen, it was that something else had vanished. The background noise, the unnoticed hum upon which all life depends, had been completely stripped away from this space. Avi stopped in her tracks. She could feel it. This land was dead. Noah pushed open the stone door at the end of the passageway, and light poured in. Not the warm glow of morning, but a pale, ashen gray, the color of cremated remains. The sky was perpetually shrouded in clouds so thick that not a hint of blue could penetrate them, revealing only a sickly yellow ring at their thinnest edges. It was the smoke and ash from the great fire of over a decade ago, sealed within the clouds, suspended day after day above Ashen Valley. Unwilling to dissipate and unable to do so, the wind was cool, but not the crisp coolness of winter. It was the chill of a corpse long past its prime, seeping beneath the skin and carrying a faint scent of charred coal. What I walked on was not soil, but ash, a mixture of black, gray, and white fragments, thick enough to cover my ankles. Every step felt like stepping into an ancient furnace. Some of the ash was whipped up by the wind, swirling in midair, before settling on my skin with a faint warmth. It hadn't cooled completely yet. More than a decade had passed, and it still hadn't cooled completely. As far as the eye could see, there was no sign of life in Ash Valley. No trees, no grass, no birdsong or chirping insects. Only a single dead old oak tree stood crookedly in the center of the valley, its trunk charred black, its branches completely bare, like a giant skeleton standing in a graveyard. And hanging from the branches of that oak tree were countless objects, not leaves, ropes, hundreds of hemp ropes, each tied with dried bones, charred scraps of cloth, and melted silver ornaments. They swayed gently in the wind, emitting a soft clattering sound like some long-forgotten dirge. Each knot represents a moonkin who was burned to death here. Noah's voice sounded flat in the gray wind, as if muffled by a layer of water. The survivors snuck back later to hang them. No one dares take them down. The Knights of Dawn occasionally come to patrol. Avi stood on ground, where the ashes reached her ankles, looking up at the knots. Her eyes swept over a charred scrap of cloth, embroidered with the exact same symbol as the one on the hilt of the moon-weeping blade. She also spotted a half-melted silver medallion, its relief depicting the profile of a woman cradling an infant, the child's hand holding up a crescent moon. Her knees buckled. It wasn't a conscious decision to kneel. Her body reacted before her mind could process it. Her knees slammed into the cold ashes, kicking up a small cloud of black dust. Her back arched, her forehead pressed against the ground, her entire posture resembling a bent question mark. She did not cry. Tears were cheap in a place like this. The fire from over a decade ago had burned away every tear that should have been shed, leaving her with nothing but a silence, so dry it felt as though it might shatter. Noah stood behind her, neither helping her up nor speaking. He knew this kind of pain couldn't be soothed. When you stand alone in the graveyard of your entire clan, when you know that every grain of ash beneath your feet might once have been a person's heart, eyes, or fingers, any comfort is superfluous. After a long time, Ivy looked up. She looked at him first, then at the base of the oak tree hung with knots. Something was glinting where the roots lay. It wasn't the glint of a blade or the silver glow of magic, but a softer, pale golden sheen, akin to the gold leaf dust she'd seen in the tunnel, yet fainter. So faint it was nearly swallowed by the color of the ashes. "They've been here," Noah said, his voice suddenly tightening. "The most recent visit was no more than 3 days ago." He bent down and used the scabbard to brush aside the ashes near the roots, revealing a small slab of stone beneath that hadn't been completely burned. Words were carved into the stone, not the ancient script of the Moon Clan, but the common human language, the handwriting so neat it looked as if it had been measured with a ruler. Code: line negative 007. Specimen: skull of an adult female of the Moon Clan. Integrity level 3. Extraction target: resonance remnants of the moon. Weeping blade. Extraction result: negative. Recommendation: expand search area. Possibility of surviving descendants cannot be ruled out. The signature was a pattern of an interlocking gear and a sun, the emblem of the Dawn Knights. They came looking for the blade. Noah stood up, his gaze cold enough to freeze water. For years, they've been digging up bones in Ashen Valley, trying to track the moon-weeping blade's location through the residual magic of the dead. They know only lunar blood can activate the blade, so after the Great Purge, they didn't destroy it. They hid it, waiting for the next awakened lunar to activate it themselves, so they could pinpoint its location through the energy fluctuations. So that strike I made just now was essentially telling them you're not dead, that the Moon Clan's bloodline still endures, that the blade is in your hands. Noah sheathed the dagger and scanned the surroundings, his gaze settling on the ridgelines encircling Ash Valley. They must know by now. The Death Guards retreated not because they lost track of you, but because their master issued a new order. He wants you alive. No sooner had he spoken than a single golden light flickered to life on the ridge to the east of the valley. Then a second, a third, a fourth. A whole row of golden points ignited, as if someone had lit a row of candles along the ridge. But those weren't candles. They were the holy sigils on the Dawn Knight's armor, glowing with the preheating light of magical energy. Arranged in a straight line beneath the gray, white sky, they looked like a golden necklace clamped around the throat of Ashen Valley. They were already surrounded. It had happened too quickly. Less than half an hour had passed since she'd activated the moonweeping blade. The fact that the Order of the Dawn could complete their deployment, from tracking them down to encircling the mountain, in such a short time meant they were already stationed near Ash Valley. They'd been here all along, guarding this graveyard, waiting for a descendant whose bloodline had awakened to walk back on their own. Noah. Ivy stood up from the ground, moon-weeping blade clenched in her hand. The silver glow on the blade was even brighter than before. It was resonating with the ashes on this land, every grain of dust charging it. "You don't have to follow me anymore." Noah glanced at her. "They're after me. Do you really need all this fanfare just to make a run for it? You go. You've lived out there for 7 years. You know how to hide and how to run. I'll cover your retreat." By the time she uttered the words, "cover your retreat," she had already raised the blade horizontally before her. She didn't know how to wield a sword, but she knew how to stand. She had spent too long on her knees in this life, scrubbing floors for 7 years, enduring countless slaps, never even receiving a proper glance from the one she loved. Now, standing in the graveyard of her entire race, she didn't want to run anymore. Noah looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he smiled. Not a cold smile, not a bitter one. It was the kind of smile a hunter wears when he sees his prey walk right into the trap. A smile tinged with admiration and a certain clarity. "Your mother said the same thing back then." He took the hunting bow from his back and pulled the last 3 arrows from his quiver. One with a silver tip, one with black feathers, and one wrapped in a faded red string. He knocked all 3 arrows onto the bowstring, the muscles in his arms beginning to swell. she said. You go ahead, I'll hold the rear. I didn't make it later. I found you in that rundown shack of yours, and it took me 7 years to prove one thing. What thing? What I owe your Moon Clan can't be repaid with just one life. He released the bowstring. All 3 arrows flew out simultaneously, their trajectories completely defying logic. The silver-tipped arrow pierced straight into the center of a knight's sacred seal on the ridge. The black-feathered arrow spun mid-air and struck the archer at the rear of the formation. The arrow bound with the red cord split into 9 smaller arrows as it flew, scattering like a blossom and shattering every remaining golden speck. The lights on the ridge went out instantly, but they merely went out. The next second, the golden light flared up again, even brighter than before, to the east, west, and north, even on the southern ridge from which they had come. Golden holy seals lit up everywhere. There weren't just dozens of knights, there were hundreds. The Ashen Valley was completely surrounded on all sides. Even the clouds in the sky were torn apart by golden light patterns, and the faint shadows of flying mounts could be seen circling above the clouds. The Order of Dawn had never underestimated an enemy. To deal with a single Moon Clan, they had dispatched an entire legion. They feared they might not be able to wipe them out completely. Noah looked at the golden light, blanketing the mountains and valleys, and his hand, holding the bow, dropped. I take back what I said earlier. Maybe I really do owe a lot of lives. Avi gripped her blade tightly. The silver gleam on the blade was already blinding. She didn't know how long she could hold out, but she knew that at least before her ashes fell upon this valley, she had to make those bearing the golden holy seals understand that the Moon Clan did not die in silence. Just as she took her first step, the ground beneath her suddenly shook. No, not just the ground. The entire world shook. In the center of Ash Valley, a crack split open at the base of the ancient oak tree hung with knots. The fissure rapidly widened, spreading from the roots across the entire valley floor. Ash poured into the crack like flowing water, producing a massive rustling roar. An ancient pillar of green light, carrying the fresh scent of plants, surged from the depths of the fissure, shooting straight into the clouds. When this green light struck the golden fissure in the sky torn open by the sacred seal, it sizzled and died out like embers doused with water. The green light spread out, tracing a massive pattern on the ground of Ashen Valley. It was the silhouette of a tree, its roots growing from deep within the earth, its branches stretching toward the sky, every leaf glowing with a different hue, and at the center of this pattern stood the charred old oak. This is... Noah's voice, unusually, lost its composure, but he didn't finish, for just as the green light flared, far beyond several mountain ranges away in the Werewolf King's palace, Kyle, who had been curled up on his bed, tormented by the poison of the abyss flower, suddenly opened his eyes. The white wolf within him, one that had never been fully tamed, raged against his consciousness, its frantic pounding perfectly synchronized with the sudden heat radiating from his chest. He looked down and saw a pattern of light emerging on the skin of his chest. It was the shape of a leaf, identical to the glowing canopy pattern above Ash Valley. It was the birthmark he'd been born with, the shared mark of every Alpha King in the royal line. The elders had only ever said it was a symbol of kingship. No one had ever told him it held any other meaning. But now it was glowing, burning hot, issuing some command to the white wolf within him that he could not resist. Go to Ash Valley. Now, outside the palace, the 500 werewolves that had been gathered around the altar, awaiting their fate, all stopped in unison. Whatever they had been doing, feeding, fighting, or heading toward their dens, they all froze in the same instant. They bore no birthmark on their chests, but their inner wolves were howling, responding to the green beam of light streaming from afar. That was the signal that the ancient pact had been activated. The ancient oath between the Moon Clan and the werewolves. No one had ever known it was etched beneath the earth of Ash Valley. It hadn't been triggered during the Great Purge, when the Moon Clan was burned alive, because the Moon Clan had borne the burden alone. But now, a descendant of the Moon Clan stood upon the graveyard of her kin, Moonweep blade in hand, prepared to die for her fallen people. The Covenant had recognized its master. The holy seal of the Dawn Knights was completely suppressed by the green light. The knights lined up along the ridgeline began to stir. Their war horses retreated uncontrollably in the green light, while their flying mounts circled in the sky, afraid to descend. A knight who appeared to be a commander rode his horse to the very front of the formation, lifting his visor to reveal the face of a middle-aged man. His eyes were pure gold, a trait possessed only by those who had ingested the Holy Seal enhancer. He stared at the girl, holding the blade in the center of the valley, a faint smile curving his lips. The prophecy was correct. The last of the Moon Clan's bloodline will return to Ashen Valley of her own accord. He pulled his visor back down and raised his lance. All units prepare. Capture is the priority. But if any werewolves appear within sight, kill them without mercy. The lance dropped. Hundreds of Dawn Knights spurred their horses simultaneously, charging down from the ridges on all sides toward the valley floor. The golden sacred seals on their armor merged into a dazzling sea of light, while the ash kicked up by their hooves formed a billowing black wall in the air. And at the edge of Ashen Valley, the shadow of the first wolf burst out of the dense forest. Then a second, a third, not soldiers from King Kale's palace, but scattered werewolves from all the nearby fiefdoms who had sensed the ancient pact. They had received no orders. They didn't even know why they were running here. They only knew that the wolves within them were howling, demanding they fulfill a promise older than their own lives. Ash Valley was turning into a battlefield. And at the center of the battlefield, Avi raised the moon-weeping blade to her chest. Green and silver light converged upon her, and the Moon Clan runes on the wound across her back all rose to the surface of her skin. Every character glowed, pulsed, and declared to this land where her kin lay buried, "I have returned." When Kyle hit the ground, he left a shallow crater behind him. The shockwave swept aside the ashes, revealing the black scorched earth beneath. His right knee nearly slammed into the ground, but he managed to brace himself just in time. As he stood up, his left shoulder bumped against the trunk of a dead oak tree, and his body swayed twice. Avi didn't move. The moon-weeping blade in her hand was still glowing, its tip pointing at the ground. "How did you get here?" she asked. "I ran here." Kyle wiped the corner of his mouth. The back of his hand was smeared with black blood stains. The abyss flower's poison had already spread to his collarbone. Several black veins crawled out from his collar, winding up his neck and stopping just below his earlobe. His breathing was heavy and strained, his chest heaving with every breath. "I was chasing you even before you smashed the glass. I chased you to the west wall, but your scent faded. Then I heard the commotion over here." "Why were you chasing me?" "You are my servant," he said, pausing as if to catch his breath. "And you spilled my drink." Avi looked at him. His wolf markings spread from his collarbone all the way to his jawline, and his eyes shifted back and forth between green and gold. The power of the white wolf and the poison of the abyss flower were battling within him, and every second of it was written on his face. "Your poison is taking effect," she said. "I won't die. You can barely stand." "I told you I won't die." Kyle's voice was low, but he couldn't suppress the tremor caused by the toxin. He took a step forward, his knees buckling again. This time, he reached out to steady himself against the oak bark, his knuckles turning white as he gripped it. "As for you, the way you hold that knife looks like you're trying to use chopsticks for the first time." "It is my first time." "I can tell," he said. "The blade's on the wrong side." Avi glanced down at the knife in her hand, but didn't move. She didn't know if he was telling the truth, but she had no intention of bending down to check under these circumstances. "How come you can stand on this contract?" she asked. "It belongs to the Moon Clan. You should have been burned to death the moment you stepped on it." Kyle looked down at the glowing green patterns at his feet. The patterns circled the edges of his boots, not burning him, but instead flowing like water up his ankles, echoing the light of the leaf-shaped birthmark on his chest. "My mom said, a true alpha's coronation isn't just about putting on some lousy hat," he said. "The real coronation happens on the first full moon night of adulthood, signing a contract with the Moon Clan. Only after the contract is signed are you truly a king." "Sign what?" "I don't know. No one ever told me the full story." He pulled open his collar, revealing the full extent of the glowing birthmark on his chest. The edges of the mark had begun to ooze blood. Fresh red blood, different in color from the poison blood. "I only know one thing. When an alpha inherits the throne, he inherits all the debts the previous kings owed to the Moon Clan. A title, a contract, a life. Why do you think I can't let you go?" A crash echoed from the valley's perimeter. The Dawn Knight's shield wall had closed the gap once more. Golden chains of light reconnected between the tower shields, brighter than before. The earless gray wolf was pinned between two shields. The sound of its ribs snapping could be heard from dozens of paces away. A black wolf bit into a knight's arm and dragged him from his horse. But a second warhorse rammed him from the side, its hooves crushing his lower back. More werewolves charged down from the mountaintop, but they were pinned back by holy arrows before reaching the shield wall. The first wave of wolves that had broken through were cut off and surrounded in the melee, their coordination severed. Noah rushed up from the rear, his hunting bow knocked with the knight's arrow. He'd picked up from the ground. A knife wound on his left shoulder was still bleeding, and half his sleeve had been sliced off. "You too," he said. His voice was quiet, but every word drove like a nail into a plank. "You can catch up once you're mixed together as ashes. Right now the line has collapsed." Kyle swept his gaze across the battlefield. Standing half a head taller than Noah, his line of sight cleared the dead branches to take in a bird's-eye view of the entire valley. The shield wall had closed in on three sides. The south was the only gap left open, but a second wave of knights was already assembling on the southern ridge. 3 flying mounts in the sky dared not land within the range of the green light. But they circled the perimeter, their arrow turrets already loaded with armor, piercing arrows. "That gap to the south is meant for me," Kyle said. Noah glanced over as well. "Yes, they left it open on purpose. They'll close the net once you're too exhausted to run, and the toxin has eaten away at your internal organs." "I can't run anymore," Kyle said, looking not at Noah but at Ivy. "Take her through the southern gap." "We can't make it," Noah said. "Ash Valley is surrounded by open terrain. Once we're out of the valley, it's just plains. 2 legs can't outrun 4, and 4 legs can't outrun wings." Kyle didn't respond. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. His pupils had turned completely golden. "Then, let's take a gamble," he said. "Take her to the tree roots." "You mean the old oak?" "That's not an oak." Kyle crouched down, pressing his palm against the glowing contract runes on the ground. In the restricted section of the Royal Library, there's a scroll detailing the topography of Ash Valley. "That tree isn't a tree, it's the top of a tower." Noah frowned. "What tower?" "The Moon Clan's tower. The name isn't written on the parchment. There's only a symbol, the same one on the scabbard." He looked up at Ivy. "Was it mentioned in the things your mother left you?" "Number." "Then, dig." Kyle slit the palm of his hand with his fingernail and let a drop of blood fall onto the runes near the tree roots. As the blood hit the surface, it made a soft, sizzling sound, like a drop of water on a red-hot iron plate. The contract runes dimmed briefly, then brightened again, their luminosity doubling. The ash near the roots began to sink, revealing a black stone slab beneath, with a circular groove along its edge. This is. Ivy took a step forward, and the moon-weeping blade in her hand suddenly began to vibrate violently. When the symbols on the hilt aligned with the shape of the groove in the stone slab, a crisp ringing sound rang out. A keyhole! Noah crouched down and brushed the ash off the stone slab with his finger, revealing the intricate engravings on the inner side of the groove. It's exactly the same diameter as your blade's hilt. Insert it, Kyle said. Wait a minute. Avi gripped the hilt tightly, staring at the groove on the ground, then looked up at Kyle. How do you know this will work? You don't even know what the coronation pact is. The coronation pact is read on parchment. Kyle stood up. Poison had already crept up to his chin, and black blood froth formed on his lips as he spoke. But this, he tapped the stone slab with his toe, is hereditary. Every alpha receives a coordinate on the day of their coronation, carved into their bones. My coordinate is right here. He reached out and pressed Avi's hand down, directly into the groove. The moment the moonweep blade slid into the groove, time in the entire Valley of Ashes froze for a second. Then, the tree roots exploded. It wasn't an explosion. The roots split in two right down the middle, like two doors, sliding apart to reveal a flight of steps leading downward. The descent wasn't deep, about 30 steps, ending at a solid stone archway, covered in rough Moonclan runes, each stroke bearing the dullness of time's wear. Air poured out from the crack in the arch, cool and sweet. Go down. Kyle gave Ivy a shove toward the opening. This time, it wasn't just his knees that buckled. His whole body lurched forward, half a step before Noah grabbed his arm. As Noah pulled him, his fingers pressed against the inside of his wrist, where the pulse was racing at an absurd rate, its rhythm completely chaotic. Your heart is failing, Noah said. I know. Kyle shook off Noah's grip and turned to face the battlefield. With one hand, he tore open his poison-soaked shirt. On his bare chest, the leaf-shaped birthmark glowed with blinding intensity, merging with the green light of the entire contract. Avi stood at the entrance, glancing back at him. Aren't you coming down? The contract between you and me isn't over yet. Kyle didn't turn back. His voice, mingling with the sound of hooves drawing ever closer, was as rough as sandpaper scraping against stone. I kept you pinned to the palace for 7 years. Do you think I've paid my debt? I never asked you to. I'm paying it, he said. Go down. Noah tugged at Avi's arm and led her down the stairs. The moment she was dragged down, Avi saw Kyle tilt his head back and issue a command to the pack of wolves, one she had never heard before. It was not a battle cry, nor a hunting call, but the highest decree the Northern Royal House never used lightly, the Bloodline Edict. The edict consisted of only 4 words, yet in that very second, the howls of every wolf in Ashen Valley drowned out the neighing of all the warhorses. They had run down less than 20 stone steps when the stone slab above their heads snapped shut. It wasn't a slow closing. It slammed down with a thunderous crash, fitting together perfectly and cutting off all the light, all the screams, and all the humming of the sacred seals on the battlefield. The sudden silence felt like a bucket of ice water poured over their heads. All that remained in their ears were the 3 of them panting, and the sound of their own heartbeats. Noah polished his fire sickle in the darkness. The light revealed a long, narrow stone passageway, its walls carved with ancient Moonclan script. Rough strokes the kind chiseled directly into the rock. The air was cool and dry, carrying the scent of aged dust mixed with rust. Keep moving. Noah released his grip on Avi's hand, shifted his hunting bow to his left hand, and placed his right hand on the short knife at his waist. Don't stop. Avi glanced back at the sealed stone slab overhead. He's alone up there. He's the alpha. Noah didn't look back, nor did he slow his pace. He's not alone. There are hundreds of wolves out there listening to his command. You'd be better off worrying about us than him." What was the command? You heard it. She had heard it. 4 words, each one exploding from the deepest recesses of Kyle's chest, not roared for human ears, but directly into the very bones of every wolf. Once the command was given, the howls of the entire Ash Valley shifted in unison, from rage to resolve, from charge to defense. It was the sound of werewolves deciding to fill the front lines with their lives. Send her away. Ivy repeated those 4 words, her voice caught in her throat. Does he think saying something like that will make me forgive him? He wasn't asking for your forgiveness. Noah stopped at the corner of the passageway, sweeping the area ahead with the light of his fire sickle to ensure there were no ambushes. He was paying his debt. After turning the corner, the space suddenly opened up. The end of the passageway wasn't a secret chamber, but a hollowed-out underground hall. The hall was at least 3 stories high, with a dome formed from natural rock strata. Groundwater seeping from the cracks dripped down the stalactites, pooling below into a small dark lake. The water was moon-white, not transparent, but the milky white of moonlight captured and solidified by the liquid. The surface was as still as a piece of polished jade. Piles of objects lay along the lakeshore. Not treasure, not weapons, just boxes. Dozens of wooden crates were neatly stacked in 3 rows, each bearing the crescent moon emblem of the Moon Clan. Some had been pried open. Inside were not gold or silver, thick, tanned bear and wolf pelts, neatly folded. Beside them stood several more chests containing strips of dried meat and jars of fat. The wax seals on the jars had not yet completely peeled away. Further in, a row of iron racks held bow limbs, arrow shafts, and spare unstrung bowstrings. The scent of rust from the arrowheads mingled with the pungent odor of fat, coalescing in the dry air into a unique aroma characteristic of the age of cold steel. Someone had prepared this place before the Great Purge. Not a temple, not a tomb, a refuge. Noah stood before an open chest, holding a flaming sickle, staring at its contents without speaking. The expression on his face was strange, not surprise, but a deeper, weightier sense of a confirmed suspicion. He reached into the chest and pulled an arrow shaft from beneath the furs. The feathers at the arrow's tip had rotted away, but the shaft was intact, carved with a scrawled name, the letters scraped into the wood with a knife's edge. He turned the shaft over to show it to Avi. The name carved there was Liana. "Your mother's handwriting," Noah said. "I recognize it. She always carved names crookedly on her arrows." Avi took the shaft, her fingers tracing the engraving. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She clenched the shaft in her hand until her knuckles turned white, then looked up and surveyed the hall, the furs, the food, the weapons, the fresh water from the lake. Her mother had prepared everything before she died, not for her own escape, but for a Moon Clan descendant who would flee alone to Ash Valley more than a decade later. She had even factored in her own death. Why didn't she tell me about this place? Avi's voice sounded flat beneath the hall's vaulted ceiling. Without echo, as if swallowed by the moon, white surface of the dark lake, Noah leaned his fire scythe against the wall, walked to the edge of the dark lake, crouched down, and dipped his finger into the water, letting a drop touch his tongue. "Because she wasn't sure you were strong enough. If you were destined to be nothing more than a servant, you wouldn't need to know any of this. Only after you've taken the blade, activated the contract, and been surrounded on all sides would any of this matter. So, I'm only strong enough now. You're currently surrounded by the Dawn Knights beneath Ashen Valley, holding the blade of the moon's lament, with an alpha outside risking his life to block the entrance for you." Noah stood up and wiped his finger on his pants. "That's not strength, that's meeting the conditions. Once the conditions are met, the legacy unlocks automatically." He walked to the wall on the other side of the hall and tapped it with the scabbard. The sound against the wall wasn't muffled, it was hollow. There was space behind it. He ran his hand along the wall, found a slab in the corner that was loose enough to barely show a crack, and pushed hard. The slab swung open, revealing the entrance to another, narrower passage. Inside were stone steps leading upward, with a faint glimmer of light seeping in from the end. It wasn't sunlight, nor was it green light. It was ordinary orange, red firelight, the northern exit. Noah took a breath and turned to look at Ivy. Your mom mapped out the route. This passage should lead to a dense forest beyond the northern ridge. From there, it's 2 days' walk north to the border of the Northern Realm werewolf territory. What lies beyond the border? The coastal kingdom. The Dawn Knight's jurisdiction ends at the border. Their holy sigils weaken once they cross the border. They won't be able to track us on a large scale. Noah walked over to the weapons rack, grabbed a well-maintained recurve bow, and tossed it to Avi. He then grabbed 2 bundles of arrows and slung them over his own back. You go this way, I'll head back the way we came. Avi caught the bow but didn't sling it over her back. Go back, Kyle is still up there. Noah tied the 3 bundles of arrows together with a rope, his movements unbroken. How long his decree holds depends on how long he can stay on his feet. He's been poisoned. Did you see the vein in his neck? The venom has passed his collarbone. It'll reach his brain soon. Once he falls, the decree will automatically be lifted, and all the werewolves will awaken from the bloodline suppression. They'll flee. Forced into a suicide ambush, the remaining wolves will have no reason to keep dying once the decree is lifted. By then, the Order of the Dawn will simply lift the stone slab and chase us down this passage. So you're going back to help him? Ivy's tone wasn't that of a question. She'd known Noah for 7 years and had never heard him speak in this rhythm. The intervals between each sentence perfectly uniform, neither hurried nor slow, like someone who'd already played out the entire scenario in his mind and accepted every possible outcome. Help him? Noah slung his hunting bow over his back, drew the short knife from his waist to inspect the blade, then sheathed it again. I haven't finished repaying my debt to the Moon Clan. The day your mother died, I promised her I'd escort you to adulthood. You're 21 this year. I owe 3 more years. I'll pay those 3 years back in a different way. He dug out a yellowed parchment from the bottom shelf of the iron rack. Unfolding it revealed a hand-drawn map, marked with every root and water source from Ash Valley to the border of the coastal kingdom. The handwriting was identical to the carvings on the arrow shafts. Liana's handwriting. He shoved the map into Avi's hands. After you exit through the north gate, head due northwest. Don't take the main roads, stick to the ridgelines. The wind is strong up there. It'll carry your scent away, and the Dawn Knight's hounds won't be able to catch you. The first water source is behind the waterfall. Don't camp by the falls. Go downstream 2 lie and rest in the cave there. There are 3 stones stacked at the cave entrance. I placed them there 10 years ago. They should still be there. Noah. Avi clutched the map, her voice suddenly changing. You're not planning to follow me. I can't. I'm heading back south. You're heading out north. We're going in opposite directions. He reached into his collar and pulled out a thin silver chain hanging around his neck, with a ring dangling from its end. The ring wasn't made of silver or gold, but some kind of dark metal. Engraved on its face was a crescent moon, a Moon Clan wedding ring. He took the chain off and placed it on the fur-lined trunk beside Avi. This belonged to your father. Before the Great Purge, he entrusted it to me, saying that if the Moon Clan were wiped out, I should throw the ring into the dark lake in Ash Valley. I didn't throw it away. Wear it. And once you reach the coastal kingdom, find Moontear Island. There's a Moon Clan ruin on that island, and the ring can break the seal there. I don't know what's inside. Your mother didn't tell me. She only said not to wear it until you reach the coastal kingdom, or you'll be trapped. Avi stared at the ring. She didn't reach out to take it. She looked up at Noah. The light from the fire scythe flickered across his face, making his features appear even more gaunt than usual. This hunter had been following her from the shadows since she was 14. From the Moon Clan ruins to the Werewolf King's palace, from endless stacks of dirty wine glasses to this underground hall today, she thought he was just a hunter who owed her mother a life and was repaying the debt by protecting her. But he wore her father's wedding ring around his neck, carried the escape map her mother had marked by hand on his back, and remembered the exact placement of the 3 stones she'd stacked at the cave entrance 10 years ago. "Who are you, really?" she said. Noah bent down to pick up the ring, grabbed her hand, and pressed it into her palm. His fingers were rough, covered in calluses from the bowstring, but his touch was gentle. "I'm your father's aide de camp." He closed her hand around the ring, then let go, took a step back, and turned toward the passageway. "Let's go." As he reached the entrance to the passageway, the entire underground hall suddenly shook. It wasn't an earthquake. The tremor came from the ground far above, accompanied by a dull, thunderous roar like rocks fracturing deep within a mountain range. The stalactites on the ceiling swayed twice. A few small fragments broke off and fell into the dark lake, sending up moon-white splashes. Immediately afterward, the ancient Moon Clan script throughout the hall flashed simultaneously. It wasn't the green light of the contract, but the silvery white moonlight found on the blade. The moment the light flared, the moon-weeping blade in Avi's hand automatically drew itself from its sheath by an inch, the blade emitting a sharp, ringing sound, exactly the same reaction it had when it neared the contract runes on the ground. But this time it was more intense. So intense that the hilt grew hot in her palm. Noah stopped in his tracks and looked up at the glowing ancient script on the dome. The entire expanse of rough, chiseled marks was flickering, pulsing in sync with a heartbeat, as if something sealed underground for over a decade had finally heard its call. "This isn't a sanctuary." Noah's voice grew faint beneath the glowing dome, so faint it was nearly drowned out by the dripping of the dark lake. "This is..." Noah didn't finish his sentence. A thunderous crash came from outside the stone slab overhead. Not the sharp clang of clashing blades, nor the muffled thud of a sacred seal shattering, but the sound of something heavier and more massive crashing to the ground, like an ancient tree being uprooted and hurled from a great height. The tremor traveled along the stone walls into the underground chamber. The ancient Moon Clan script on the dome flashed once more, faster and more intense than before, like the pulse of a dying man. "The altar." Noah spat out the remaining 2 words. Then he drew his dagger. "We're standing directly beneath the altar." Avi was already on the move. She wasn't running toward the north exit. Instead, she shoved the map and ring into her bosom, grabbed the moon-weeping blade, and stepped right past Noah, darting back into the passageway they'd come from. Her footsteps echoed fast and crisp on the stone steps, each one landing in the gaps between the flickering green lights. Noah cursed behind her, his voice squeezed into a thin line by the narrow walls of the passageway, trailing after her retreating figure. "The north exit is the wrong way." "I know." Ivy didn't stop. As she rounded the bend in the passageway, her shoulder struck the rock wall, sending a shower of debris cascading down. She swung her blade horizontally, its back pressed against the wall as she continued running. The 20 stone steps had been the way down. Now they were the way up. By the time she reached the 8th step, the stone slabs began to shake. Not a vibration, but the low-frequency rumble of the entire slab sliding along its track. Someone above had pried open the seal. The first thing to pour in through the gap in the sliding stone slab was sound. Wolf howls, horse hooves, the clang of metal, the crackle of flames, the wind, everything she had ever heard on the surface surged in at once. But the proportions were completely different. The war horses of the Dawn Knights were whinnying at less than half their usual volume. The golden chains of light forming the shield wall had snapped into several pieces. The suppressing frequency of the holy seal had shifted from a continuous hum to intermittent pulses. Like a machine running on fumes, desperately clinging to life. And the wolf howls were still there. But they were no longer the sharp cries of a charge. They were the hoarse, desperate wails of wounded beasts holding their ground. The stone slab slid completely aside. Avi leaped from the opening onto the ground, and the first thing she saw was the sky. The clouds above Ash Valley had been churned by some force into a massive vortex. At its center lay a mixture of silvery white and dark green, its edges spreading outward, as if someone had tossed a stone into the sky, and the ripples were still pushing outward. The green light remained, as did the contract patterns, but their brightness had dimmed by more than half. The glowing lines on the ground had shifted from vivid green to a sickly gray-green, and in some places the patterns had fractured, with black smoke rising from the breaks. The second thing I saw was Kyle. He was still by the oak tree, but he was no longer standing upright. He was leaning on the trunk with one hand, the muscles in his shoulders twitching uncontrollably, each spasm causing the black veins above his collarbone to bulge for an instant. The venom had already crept past his jaw and was spreading toward his right eye. The skin around his right eye had turned a deep purple, but his pupil remained golden, a gold brighter than before, unnaturally bright as if it were burning. 3 wolves had gathered beside him. The earless gray wolf lay on its side at his feet, its flank pierced by a holy arrow, the tip protruding from the other side, the charred edges of the wound still oozing blood. The black wolf had a broken front leg, the bone protruding from its fur, yet it crouched to Kyle's left, supporting itself on its 3 intact legs. Its mouth was slightly open, and gleaming metal shards, likely from a knight's gauntlet, were lodged between its teeth. The third was a white wolf that had charged down from the northern cliff. It was the least injured, bearing only a slash across its left cheek, yet it stood guard at Kyle's right side, the fur on its neck bristling as it emitted a continuous, low growl toward the shield wall. The Order of the Dawn had regrouped. The shield wall remained, though a third of the tower's shields were missing. Several knights stood on foot, their war horses either having fled or lying among the wolf carcasses on the ground. The archers had moved to the flanks, while the knights at the front raised their lances into a throwing stance. The orbs of holy light atop the lance tips had shifted from gold to a deep orange. This was a secondary enchantment, at least half as potent as the first, but sufficient against the already wounded pack of wolves. A banner hung unfurled from the commander's horse. Embroidered in the center of the golden fabric was a burning sun. The patterns of the flames were stitched with silk thread, reflecting a blinding orange, red glow under the green light. This banner was a symbol used only when the Order of Dawn carried out hunting missions beyond their borders. Once the Sunday banner was unfurled, it signaled that the target was not to be treated as a prisoner of war, did not need to be captured alive, and was to be killed on the spot. Kyle turned his head, catching a glimpse of Avi leaping out of the cave, out of the corner of his eye. In that single second, his expression went through 3 distinct phases: first shock, then rage, and finally a kind of suppressed, almost resigned weariness. The 3 emotions flashed across his venom. Corroded face so quickly that by the time Noah crawled out of the cave, Kyle's expression had already returned to the cold detachment of battle. "I said north," he rasped, his voice hoarse, as if his vocal cords had been corroded by venom. "You have no right to command me anymore," Avi said. "That ended 7 years ago." She took 2 steps forward, positioning herself a body's length away from Kyle, the tip of her blade pointing ahead. The commander spotted her from his horse. He smiled behind his visor and raised his hand in a downward gesture. Archers on both flanks drew their bows simultaneously. Their arrows were not holy arrows, they were ordinary armor-piercing arrows. Their supply of holy oil had been nearly exhausted in the recent melee. First volley prioritized the Moon Clan. The commander's voice came through his visor, muffled but clear. "Alpha, keep them alive. The higher-ups want an interrogation." Avi switched her sword to her dominant hand. She didn't look at Kyle, nor at Noah. She looked at the wall of shields, at the archers behind them, and at the man on horseback raising the signal flag behind the archers. She recalled the last words her mother had spoken 7 years ago before pushing her into the secret passage. She had never fully understood those words. Stay alive and wait for that blade to take you home. She had thought she was being told to return to Ash Valley. Now she knew home wasn't Ash Valley. Home was the blade itself. The curve of the blade is wrong. Kyle's voice came from her right rear, his breath already faint. You've already said that. I'm not lying to you this time. Touch the inscription on the hilt to the contract's fracture. On your left side, there's no fracture. On my left side, crouch down and look. She didn't crouch, but she swept the ashes from around her feet with the tip of the blade. The break was less than an inch from the outside of her left foot. A contract pattern severed by the holy seal. The green light at the break had already faded, leaving only a faint silver, white glow flickering in the crevice. She pressed the inscription on the hilt against it. The moon-weeping blade emitted an extremely faint, drawn-out hum. The liquid galaxy within the blade suddenly boiled violently, and silver light gushed forth from every groove on the blade's edge, spine, and hilt, transforming the entire sword into a pure rod of moonlight. Then the tip of the blade lifted of its own accord. It wasn't her hand moving it, but the blade guiding her. The tip was aimed directly at the largest tower shield, at the very center of the shield wall. Noah, watching from her side and behind, saw exactly where the tip was pointing. It wasn't the thickest part of the tower shield. It was the seam where 2 shields met at the upper left corner. The gap was only 3 fingers wide, about 40 paces from the throat of the captain, standing right in the middle of the archers' formation. A whole row of heavily armored knights stood between them. That angle is impossible, Noah said. Avi didn't reply. She had already released her left hand. Gripping the hilt with her right hand alone, the blade's tip had automatically aligned itself half a finger's width above the gap. Her breath caught for a moment. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Kyle's right hand clenched around the tree trunk, the white knuckles showing, but he was smiling. Not the grim smile of someone about to die, but the smile of a wolf that had spotted a weakness in its prey. The archers released their strings. 35 armor, piercing arrows flew from the bows simultaneously. At that very moment, Avi's blade fell. The archers released their strings. 35 armor, piercing arrows flew from the bows simultaneously. The very second the archers released their arrows, Avi's blade fell. It wasn't a slash. It was a thrust. She drove the tip of the moon-weeping blade directly into the contract's fracture on the ground, the blade sinking 3 inches into the stone crevice. Silver moonlight erupted from the blade. Not a beam, but a curve, a crescent-shaped silver arc sweeping out from the fracture at twice the speed of the arrows. 35 armor, piercing arrows were intercepted mid-air by this arc of light. The moment their tips touched the silver glow, they all exploded, showering the night formation with the rain of shards of metal and broken feathers. Several archers were pierced through the throat guards by fragments of their own arrows. Wait, Noah's words trailed off, for that single arc of light was not the end of it. After the blade plunged in, the entire contract pattern lit up segment by segment from the inside out. With each segment that lit up, a new crescent arc sprang from the ground, detonating in rapid succession from the fracture toward the shield wall. 7 times in all. Each arc was wider than the last, faster, and struck at a more treacherous angle. The first 3 arcs pierced the front of the shield wall. The 4th severed the platform, holding the left flank of archers. The 5th sliced the last 3 tower shields in half simultaneously. The 6th flew over all the knights and struck the Sunday banner behind the Dawn Knights, shattering the flagpole into 6 pieces and reducing the golden fabric to shreds. The seventh arc shot into the sky, striking the right wing of a circling flying mount. The griffin let out a piercing scream as the sacred sigil on its wing was completely swallowed by the moonlight. Rider and mount plummeted from the sky, crashing into the center of the shield wall's ruins, and sending a 3-meter-high cloud of ash billowing upward. 35 vibrations of bowstrings were drowned out by the 7 arcs of moonlight. The entire sequence took no more than 2 heartbeats. The commander's visor was struck by shrapnel, cracking a fissure in the left eye slot. He yanked the visor off, revealing a face in his 40s. Not one of anger, but of the bewilderment of a hunter who, after 20 years of the chase, had been bitten by his prey for the first time. His mouth opened slightly, but before he could issue a command, the shockwave from the 7th arc of moonlight striking the flying mount knocked him from the saddle. His right foot remained caught in the stirrup, and he was dragged 5 or 6 paces by the startled horse before he could free himself. As he stood up, his left shoulder dislocated, and his arm hung at his side at an unnatural angle. "Second," he shouted. But before he could finish, Avi emerged from the ash and smoke. She hadn't drawn her sword. It still sat sheathed in the gash in the ground. The liquid galaxy on its blade had reached a boiling point, and the entire sword hummed softly, like a heartbeat suppressed for over a decade finally finding an outlet. With every step she took unarmed, her feet landed on the glowing nodes of the contract runes. With each step, the moonlight on her body grew brighter. It wasn't her clothes that glowed, it was the veins beneath her skin. Silvery light spreading along the veins of her arms, collarbone, and the side of her neck, echoing the dark metal of the Moon Clan wedding ring on her finger. The ring was glowing. It wasn't a reflection of light. The ring itself was burning, the crescent moon on its face transforming into a full, scorching, rapidly spinning lunar disk. The commander stared at her and took a step back. It wasn't a tactical retreat. It was instinct, the muscle memory of prey encountering its natural predator. "You," he managed only a single word. Avi pulled the moon's lament blade from the ground. The motion of drawing the blade was as crisp as that of sheathing it, without a single superfluous movement, devoid of any emotion. The moment the blade emerged from the ground, the afterimages of the 7 lunar arcs had not yet faded. The silver glow of the blade and the lingering green light from the outer ring intertwined amidst the ash and smoke, weaving a complex pattern that resembled a blossoming flower. "You just mentioned the first volley," she said, holding the blade horizontally before her, the tip pointing at the commander. "What about the second?" Behind the ruins of the shield wall, archers were indeed drawing their bows, but fewer than 10 of them. The rest had either had their bows knocked from their hands by the moonlight arcs or had their hands injured by shards of their own arrows. The fingers of those drawing their bows were trembling, and their arrows were not aimed at Ivy, but at the sword in her hand, which was still emitting a silvery glow. Their holy oil was completely exhausted. The holy light on the arrowheads was so faint it was almost invisible. The commander clutched his dislocated left hand and drew the knight's sword from his waist with his right. The blade was engraved with sacred prayers. The final row of characters was stained with dried wolf's blood. He held the sword horizontally, the tip pointing directly at the center of Avi's forehead. "In the name of Dawn." Avi didn't let him finish. She swung her blade. This strike was unlike any she had made before. Previously, she had been wielding the blade, using this moon-weeping blade as a weapon. But this time, the blade was wielding her. Her arm, wrist, and fingers were merely extensions of the blade itself. The blade determined the arc, speed, and point of impact of the strike. The path traced by the blade was not a single line, but a 3-dimensional crescent-shaped blade shadow. Over the distance of less than 10 paces from where she stood to the commander's chest, this blade shadow split of its own accord as it moved, dividing into 2, then 4, then 8 moonlit afterimages striking the commander's sword simultaneously. The knight's sword snapped. It wasn't knocked away, It was cleanly severed in the middle, the fracture as smooth as a mirror. The 8 afterimages passed through the broken blade and struck the commander's breastplate. The breastplate, forged from the Holy Seal, emitted 8 crisp, successive cracks, like ice being shattered under repeated footsteps. The first 7 were the sound of the Holy Seal shattering, and the last was the sound of the metal itself cracking. The commander was sent flying, his back slamming into a fragment of a tower shield amidst the ruins of the shield wall. As he slid to a sitting position, a long, narrow gash ran vertically across his chest, from his collarbone all the way to his belt. But there was no blood. It had happened too quickly. The muscles hadn't had time to tear the blood vessels. "This isn't your power." The commander stared at the gash on his chest, then looked up at Avi. The bewilderment in his eyes had turned to fear. Not fear of death, but fear of an unknown power. "You, an orphan of the Moon Clan who hasn't undergone the coming of age right. How could you possibly? Who told you I haven't undergone the coming of age right?" Avi said. She raised her left hand, palm open. The Moon Clan wedding ring had fused with the veins on her finger. A projection of a full moon rose from the ring's surface, hovering 2 inches above her palm. The projection wasn't silvery white, it was a blood moon. Deep crimson moonlight surged from the ring, bathing the entire valley of ashes, and staining the remaining sacred seals of the Order of the Dawn Knights, a color akin to rust. The commander stared at the blood moon, his expression shifting completely in that instant, from fear to something far deeper. He recognized that symbol, not from a book, not from intelligence reports, but from seeing it with his own eyes over a decade ago, on the night of the Great Purge, on the dome of the Moon Clan's royal palace. At the moment the last Moon Clan queen raised the blood moon ring and activated the royal city seal with her life. "You are her daughter." The commander's voice suddenly grew quiet. "I've come to collect what's owed," said Avi. She pressed the blood moon ring against the inscription on the hilt of the moon-weeping blade. The instant the ring touched the inscription, the swirling cloud mass above the entire valley of ashes was torn apart by a beam of blood, red moonlight shooting straight up from the ground, not sweeping over it, not enveloping it, but tearing right through it. A massive circular hole was blasted in the center of the cloud layer, revealing the true full moon. Moonlight poured down from the sky, falling upon every inch of scorched earth in Ash Valley, upon the fractured contract runes, upon the mountains of corpses, and upon the surviving Dawn Knights and wounded wolves. Every wound touched by the moonlight began to heal, not at a human pace, but at a speed visible to the naked eye, an instantaneous regeneration. The holy arrow lodged in the gray wolf's side. The one missing an ear was forced out by newly formed muscle. The arrowhead clattered to the ground, and within 3 seconds the wound had closed and scabbed over. By the 4th second, gray fur had grown back to cover the scar. The black wolf's severed leg reattached itself. A dull crack sounded as the bones realigned beneath the skin. It howled in pain, but after the howl, it lowered its foreleg and planted it firmly on the ground. The black veins above Kyle's collarbone began to fade. The venom wasn't being forced out. It was evaporating directly under the light of the blood moon. A wisp of extremely fine, faint black smoke rose from the surface of his skin. With each wisp, the brightness of his golden eyes returned a little more. His right hand, still clutching the oak tree, held onto the bark. But his knuckles were no longer white. The blood color beneath his fingernails had returned. The surviving knights of the Order of Dawn were not so fortunate. As the blood moon shone upon their sacred seal armor, the prayers inscribed upon it began to burn in reverse. Not because the moonlight was burning them, but because they were burning themselves. In the presence of the blood moon, the sacred seal had become a self-devouring curse. The few knights still standing began frantically tearing at their armor, ripping off their breastplates, bracers, and throat guards, one by one, and flinging them to the ground. The discarded metal continued to burn in the ashes, emitting a pungent white smoke. The one-armed commander leaned against the shards of his tower shield, watching all this without moving. His lips moved slightly, uttering a word so soft only he could hear it. Attribution. Then he closed his eyes. Avi sheathed her blade. The sound of metal sliding into its scabbard was crisp and brief, like the fall of a period. She turned around. Kyle had already let go of the oak tree and was standing beside the roots, propping himself up on his knees. His breathing was still heavy, but the rasping sound of the toxin had vanished. The leaf-shaped birthmark on his chest had faded, reverting to an ordinary dark mark. He raised his eyes to look at her, his golden pupils having shrunk back to their normal size. "You said you came to collect a debt." Kyle's voice was still hoarse, but his tone had regained a familiar, awkward edge. "So how do you account for those 7 years the palace owes you in your ledger?" Avi hooked the scabbard onto the old leather buckle at her waist and tightened it. This buckle was a belt used to fasten aprons in the royal kitchen. She'd used it for 7 years, fraying it 3 times, tying 5 knots, and now it was worn thin. Anyone else, upon obtaining an ancient artifact, would have replaced this tattered buckle first. She hadn't. 7 years for a life, she said. "I've collected my due." She walked past him, taking her first step toward the north exit. As she took that first step, the blood moon still shone overhead, and the ashes beneath her feet made a faint rustling sound. As she took her second step, footsteps sounded behind her. Not Noah's. She had listened to Noah's footsteps for 7 years, the light tread of a hunter, stepping on ash as if on snow. These footsteps were heavy, as if stepping on stone, each one carrying a sluggishness and clumsiness typical of someone still recovering. Kyle followed behind, about 3 paces away. He didn't speak, nor did he ask if he could tag along. He simply followed, just as he had 7 years ago when she was escorted out of the Moon Clan's ruins. Only that time he walked ahead and she was dragged behind. This time she walked ahead and he followed behind, with no rope, no orders, no contract. "What about your throne?" Ivy didn't turn around. That gap in the clouds over Ash Valley is now visible from the observatories of at least 3 nations. News of the Blood Moon's reappearance will spread across the entire continent before dawn. After this battle, the Knights of Dawn will return to the Holy Court with a single narrative: that the Moon Clan's orphan has revived an ancient artifact, joined forces with the Werewolf Alpha, and annihilated their hunting legion in Ash Valley. Kyle's voice followed her from behind, his tone flat, not as if he were analyzing the situation, but rather reciting a pre-written conclusion. "Starting tomorrow, my claim to the throne will not depend on which chair I sit in, but on whose side I stand." Avi paused for a moment. Just a moment, then she continued walking. Noah emerged from the rubble, his shoulder laden with 3 unopened quivers of holy oil arrows and a full bundle of spare bowstrings salvaged from the knights' corpses. In his other hand, he dragged a recurve bow whose limbs had been severed by the moonlight, the very one he'd just taken from the iron rack to give to Avi. The bow's limbs were snapped clean in 2, the break as smooth as a mirror, but the grip remained intact and the string was unbroken. "Spare." He hoisted the broken bow onto his shoulder, walked to the opening concealing the north exit, kicked aside the 3 stacked stones, and turned to watch Kyle and Avi approaching one after the other. A blood-soaked werewolf alpha, the birthmark on his chest just fading, stood barefoot on the ashes, trailing behind a Moon Clan orphan, with a cook's leather belt around her waist and an ancient artifact slung over her back. Her expression was that of a sheepdog that had been beaten half to death, but had finally found its flock. Noah watched for 3 seconds, then removed the bowstring from the broken bow, rolled it up, and stuffed it into his quiver. "After you go up the north exit, head due north-northwest," he said, his tone fully back to its usual rhythm, neither hurried nor slow, as if he were giving tomorrow's weather forecast. "Follow the ridge line, don't take the main road. The first water source is behind the waterfall. You already told us that last time, Ivy said as she walked past him. I didn't finish. Last time I said there are 3 stones stacked at the entrance to the cave. Once you get there, wait for me for a day. I'm going to alter the Border Patrol's routine route. What did you say? Ivy turned to look at him. The patrol is made up of the Order of the Dawn. Noah slung the flask of holy oil to the most comfortable spot on his waist and tested the sharpness of the arrowhead with his thumb. I served as captain of the Dawn Knights Border Patrol for 12 years. Before the Purge, I was your father's second in command. After the Purge, I went undercover with the Dawn Knights, staying deep inside their ranks for 9 years, before being reassigned to the northern border 3 years ago. He wiped the arrowhead clean on his sleeve. Before she died, Liana asked me to protect you until you came of age. Using my position as patrol captain, I altered every patrol route along the border with the werewolf territories. As long as you're within the north, you won't be discovered by the hunting parties within our patrol radius. He slung his hunting bow back over his shoulder and walked past Kyle without pausing. I've kept this secret for 16 years. I'm exhausted. Now that the blood moon has exploded, my cover will be blown before dawn. Rather than wait to be purged by the Holy Court, I'd rather use up my remaining days as captain. I'm going to alter the patrol routes along the border for the next 3 days. You two slip through the gap. Kyle spoke up. Noah, don't call me. Noah didn't even turn his head. I haven't finished repaying what I owe the Moon Clan, but I owe you nothing. Listen, if she gets hurt again in the Coastal Kingdom, I don't care what race's king you are, I'll come back from Moontear Island to find you. He walked toward the western exit of Ashen Valley, his silhouette fading into the shadows beyond the blood moon's reach. His footsteps grew fainter and fainter, eventually blending with the wind until they vanished entirely. Avi stood where she was, still clutching the arrow shaft engraved with the name Liana. She placed the shaft back into her quiver, handling it gently as if setting down a fragile object. The stone steps to the north stretched on for a long way. Ancient Moon Clan script was carved into every step. Some of the engravings still bore the rough edges of the chisel, while others had been worn smooth by countless footsteps. Avi began to climb, with Kyle following behind, the 3-step distance between them remaining constant. At the end of the steps lay a circular stone slab. When she lifted it, the cold autumn wind of the north swept in. Beyond lay the edge of the dense forest. Overhead, the blood moon was slowly sinking toward the west, and the ridgeline, illuminated by the full moon, stood out sharply, like a silver-gray wolf crouching on the earth. She stood at the cave entrance, gazing toward the ridgeline, her right hand unconsciously brushing the hilt of the knife at her waist. The hilt was cool, but something inside the sheath was vibrating gently. Not an alarm, not a warning, but a very light, steady, and sustained warmth, as if a knife had finally found the hand that would hold it.